To show you the data that the people that want to, pick on me for using generative AI don't want you to see and to know here. I'm just so interested in tech, man. Like, for the most part, usually what I'm doing with ChatGPT is having it teach me more about tech and how it's all put together and how it works. But, anyways, here, this is an article from Bryant Research, and, I think we're going to begin a change that I've been meaning to make. So, Vim. No. Vim Research. Fortunately, I've changed console's layout here so that it's good and proper. Okay, so I have to save the source because I may, need to lead back to it at some point, Anyways, recently there's been growing concern about water needed for AI systems like ChatGPT and Google Bards powering our online lives. Headlines highlight the cooling needs of data centers, and the numbers are eye-catching, but let's put it into perspective. What ChatGPT uses about 18.2 billion liters of water, and thank God I pronounced that one right this time. I have trouble, by the way, YouTube, I have trouble when I have to read numbers out loud for some reason. I'm not dyslexic. It hits my brain. I understand the number. I just mispronounce it sometimes. Dairy pronunciation consumes a staggering 4 million, or no, 4,555 billion liters, basically. So that's nearly 250 times more water for a single industry. AI's water consumption is a drop in the bucket compared to the livestock industry, especially dairy and beef. If we want to conserve water, we need to focus on where it counts. Animal agriculture. Now, I don't like ending up siding with PETA on this one, but I end up having to defend myself for using AI.
This insight compares the water footprint of AI data centers with that of the beef and dairy industries. While AI's water consumption is increasing and a concern, it's significantly smaller than the vast amounts of water used by animal agriculture, particularly beef and dairy. Beef and dairy production require trillions of liters of water daily, far exceeding AI's consumption. Additionally, these industries contribute to water pollution and have negative health, environmental, and economic impacts. Our insight suggests that transitioning away from water intensive beef and dairy towards plant based diets offers a substantial opportunity to address global water scarcity. The key takeaway here isn't to dismiss the water needs of AI, but to understand the bigger picture. While AI's water usage is a valid concern, it pales in comparison to the massive water footprint of the beef and dairy industries, which should be our primary focus of efforts to conserve water.
Now, if I were to talk about this one, what I would say is that, I do have a taste for meat, but I don't have a taste for beef, and when I do eat meat, it tends to be chicken rather than pork, but I do like pork. But since I get fed usually later in the days, usually it's going to some chicken joint. I don't want to specify at this point. In recent years, concerns about artificial intelligence have expanded beyond its societal implications to include environmental impacts, particularly water consumption. Headlines have called out large amounts of water required for cooling AI data centers. However, when compared against the water usage of cattle farming, AI's demands are a drop in the bucket, paling in comparison. Understanding the bigger picture is crucial to refocusing efforts on the greater environmental challenge, livestock farming. In recent years, concerns about AI intelligence have expanded beyond it. So right. So I'm just trying to see if this is repeating itself. So what? Anyways, headlines have called out the large amount of water required. So, anyways, this is repeating. Understanding, yeah. So that's Bryant Research. You need to be aware of this. Your article is looping a little bit here. AI systems such as ChatGPT rely on massive data centers that require significant cooling to function effectively. This is true. you know, heat is the enemy of computers, and so computers need to fight heat. You can do it with fans, but um, and air, to some extent, but water is often more effective in a lot of ways. Water use across data centers can vary significantly, anywhere from 68,000 liters in small facilities to 2.1 million in the largest ones, equivalent to the daily consumption of about 4,200 people. With more and more large data centers comes a greater demand for water. Google's data center consumed 20% more water in 2022 compared to 2021, when Microsoft water usage increased by 34% in the same year. Now, regulation may help in a way because it can tell us, that it's okay to use some other liquid for cooling. I mean, if you had, hypothetically, for instance, if you had a completely dehumidified, data center, even using liquid nitrogen would become possible because you wouldn't have to worry about water condensation, from, freezing and then cracking, which is the real problem with overclocking with those kinds of substances. But yeah, you really could. It would expand the range of options to cool things, to say the least. To completely dehumidify the place, it has to be bone dry though. Around half of the data center demand is for AI, and that's rising rapidly. That's because for the past few years, the primary method companies have used to create smarter, more capable AI models is to increase the amount of data and cooling power used to build it, often by 10 to 100 times. You know, the whole problem is that my individual use case for using AI is mostly text based, and I really haven't seen a big need for things to scale up, and to have more, maybe it's smarter, but I don't think that I need it to be like more capable of things like generating images. It was already sufficient. I very rarely ever generate an image. It's mostly text, because I'm learning, studying, and chatting. You've seen my use on this if you've paid attention to my channel. You saw me in my video, just the other day. Let's not be AI coders, let's not be vibe coders, anyways. You know, these figures are undoubtedly concerning. However, we should be cautious about sounding the alarm bells on AI for two reasons. Firstly, there's significant progress in reducing AI's water impact, and secondly, it may distract from a far greater resources of wasted water. Yes, this is very significant, and yeah, the AI. The thing about the tech industry is that it can be fairly relentless in improvement. Like, if you get where I'm going and what I'm trying to say about that, like, even Google is probably not going to be, and ChatGPT and OpenAI are probably not happy about the water usage that they have, because even saying this, like, water isn't free anymore. It's not like it costs them nothing. So reducing those costs are just going to be important to them. It's also going to be they get bragging rights, with a corporate culture operates at this point. They can say, well, we reduced our water usage, we're more environmentally friendly, and the public will respond. Despite these numbers, the water usage associated with AI demand remains significantly lower than that of coal, biodiesel, and nuclear energy. Although, can I be real with you? I'm a little bit concerned that, nuclear cooling systems, Yeah, but how much? Okay, after you put the initial water in, how much does a nuclear power plant continue to take on new water? Does it need, because sometimes there's an initial upfront cost, but then you can just keep cycling the same water back through and have it chilled on a loop. You know, there's processes that you can use to do that. Basically, you don't need to constantly put in new water sometimes. Moreover, efforts to mitigate AI's water footprint are already underway. Companies like Google have pledged to use recycled water for cooling, and some facilities have engaged with local communities to minimize their impact on regional water resources. Google and Microsoft are both prototyping zero water solutions, closed-loop systems that capture and reuse evaporated water. See, like I was telling you, additionally, new cooling designs could save up to 125 million liters annually. So while companies are building models and serving them to more people than ever before, they are also working on efficiency improvements to partially offset these increases. As resource hungry as data centers appear to be, the dark reality is that for decades another industry has dominated our resources, particularly freshwater use. ChatGPT's water requirements pale in comparison to animal agriculture, especially beef and dairy. You know, these are the two big impacts, basically. In stark contrast to AI, animal agriculture is the major driver of global water consumption and environmental degradation. Livestock accounts for over a quarter of all of humanity's water use. Much of this water is used to grow crops like corn and soy, which serve as feed for billions of farmed animals. Feed can account for a staggering 41% of all the water used in agriculture. Now, there's another thing that you should know that, a quarter pounder hamburger takes about 450 pounds of water. Basically it's a huge amount of water, like 450 gallons. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, not pounds, water, gallons. So, just to get to that point. Similarly, a chat GPT query can take half a tablespoon. Do you understand that that's, the scale that we're operating at here? Beef and dairy are particularly water hungry. Producing a kilogram of beef alone requires a staggering 15,400 liters of water. Globally, the daily usage for the beef production amounts to 2.4 trillion liters, with leather and other cow products adding up to 2.53 trillion liters per day. That means that together, beef, leather, and byproducts, demand over 5 trillion liters of water. That's roughly the equivalent of 2 million Olympic-sized swimming pools per day. Beyond direct water use, manure, runoff, and agricultural fertilizers contribute to water pollution, leading to harmful algal growth and biodiversity loss in freshwater ecosystems. The environmental footprint of dairy production dwarfs many industrial activities, including AI's water consumption. In fact, dairy farming tops all other agricultural sectors by billions of liters. Beef has deservedly drawn scrutiny over the past decades, but it's time for dairy to face the same. Although beef uses more water per kilo, we produce far more dairy, 250 million metric tons versus 400 million for beef and veal. Oh god, giving up milk would be painful. But let's look at the toll it's taking. Industrial's dairy toll. Actually, you know what? The thing about milk is that I haven't been using as much of it lately. Industrial dairy tolls on water systems is staggering. A Food and Water Watch highlights how major basin states such as Arizona, California, and Colorado are strained by the sector. Alfalfa is a key feed crop for dairy cows. It consumes 2.2 trillion gallons of water annually across the 7 basin states. The fresh water is vital for residents who have now had to face severe droughts. Ouch. Meanwhile, I can see why people would come at AI at this point. They'd be like, well, you can't. Anybody that uses water at all ends up getting demonized in a drought. But, hey, look. Any unnecessary use of it gets severely, criticized by people. But, hey. Meanwhile, the 2.5 million dairy cows on mega dairies in these states require an additional 2 million gallons of water per day for drinking and washing alone. To make matters worse, industrial dairy farming not only depletes water but also degrades the quality of ecosystems. Improper manure and fertilizer management leads to contaminated local water resources such as wetlands and forest in both scale and impact. Industrial cattle farming, both beef and dairy, is one of the most water-intensive and water-destructive systems on the planet. AI... Yeah, wow. Wow. That's just ouch. You know what? I'm making... Shit. I can tell you with that pork image, it's mostly chicken for me, because I tend to get fed later in the day, so it's even less, ultimately, than that. And plus, my ChatGPT generation tends to be in text mode. Of course, everything we do, and I used to, in the morning, like the first thing that I would do is get a big glass of milk, but these days my throat hasn't been as dry in the morning, so like every couple of days maybe I'll have a glass, but yeah, I use a lot less of it than traditionally. Everything we do requires environmental resources, so it's not enough to argue that something has a high environmental impact. The cost must be weighed against the benefit. The most water intensive industry in the world could still be worthwhile if it supplies substantial benefits and there is no good alternative. Can such a case be made for beef and dairy industries? Impact on human health. Far from being essential for human health, beef and dairy consumption increase the risk of cancer, heart disease, and diabetes, putting a heavy burden on the public healthcare systems. Moreover, intensive animal farms are a leading cause of new disease. Impact on environmental outcomes. Aside from water, beef and dairy are some of the most carbon and land intensive foods on the human diet. Grass fed beef and dairy are a key driver of deforestation worldwide. If cattle were able to form their own country, they would rank third behind China and the United States among the world's largest greenhouse emitters. Impact on food security. While meat and dairy is a food many people eat regularly, that does not make it important to food security. In fact, the modern meat industry undermines food security by increasing dependence on imports, costing taxpayers money that they could spend on healthier foods, and consuming large amounts of food that could be fed to humans. Impact on the economy. AI and tech creates well-paying, future-proof jobs, and AI tools unlock new levels of productivity for the entire economy. On the other hand, jobs in animal agriculture are declining over time, and many are low-paid and backbreaking. Yep, right there. Right there is the big thing about it. Like, the thing about ChatGPT is it's making me more valuable to the economy. That's one of the reasons why I'm so defensive about my use of it. I just released a big, bot that could, attach subtitles to people's video files in batch format, and everything on GitHub, because I've learned a lot of the essentials of prompt engineering, and not only that, I've nurtured ChatGPT to remember that I'm very concerned about, how fast code executes, at runtime, how fast is the process going to take? How intensive is it going to be on resources? How heavy is it going to utilize RAM and everything? Can I get a low overhead for using it and a lot of processing? Even if it is processing heavy, how fast can we, start and finish the process and everything? I'm obsessed with this sort of thing. But why, anyways, trying to stick on point, the huge potential of tackling beef and dairy. Why water use from AI is positioned to reduce overtime resource use from animal agriculture is not. While we can make some efficiency gains in dairy, better genetics, and animal welfare, for example, most of these gains have already been made. There's ultimately very little potential to make dairy more water efficient than it currently is. After all, milk is mostly water, meaning that producing vast amounts of milk will always require producing vast amounts of water. Ouch. On the other hand, this presents a bold opportunity transitioning away from water-intensive beef, and dairy offers a significant opportunity to solve global water scarcity. One solution is a plant-forward diet. Plants can provide roughly two-thirds of the global protein supply with just a quarter of agricultural land. Moreover, switching to plant-based meat could reduce water use by up to 99%. By cultivated meat could lead to a 65% reduction. Plant-based milk alternatives are already mainstream, found in supermarkets and cafes near you. It's encouraging to see incremental gains in AI's water efficiency. However, these improvements are minor compared to the transformative impact that reforms at the beef and dairy could achieve. Reform in that place would be to stop using it or drastically reduce usage. As the world grapples with environmental challenges, prioritizing efforts to tackle the largest contributors to water scarcity is essential. While AI's water usage is on a concerning upward trajectory, it's minuscule compared to the trillions of liters used daily by animal agriculture. Criticizing AI for its water use without acknowledging livestock farming's vastly greater environmental impact misdirects public concern and resources. To ensure our water security for decades to come, replacing beef and dairy in our diets is essential. That's There are, and if you're curious, about anything, I do want you to know that if you go to this link, they can cite their sources and everything. Bryant Research is, absolutely. See, look in the underbar, like, the Conservative Animal Welfare Foundation.org is being cited, their WordPress content, but it's a PDF and everything. And we've got a lot of sources here and everything. And by the way, it would be on the bottom left where it shows the URLs, the damn thing. So there are sources here to all of their data and everything. So when I link this in the underbar, keep in mind that it backs up all of its claims and everything. It doesn't just say things. It has research that is backing what it's saying and everything. They know what they're doing in that regard. They don't just link you to something or say something without backing their claims up.